In the last episode, we discussed some core competencies regarding the offensive rotation of the Brewmaster monk. Understanding your offensive kit will lead to a better understanding of how those abilities interact with the class's ability to mitigate damage. Before we talk about forms of mitigation though, I wanted to dedicate a video covering Shuffle and Stagger, how they define the class, and some of the Stagger-based talents that we have access to. Let's dive in. Stagger is the defining mitigation style of the Brewmaster monk. They have this distinct ability to convert most of their direct damage that they take and turn it into a damage over time effect. I've actually made a pretty comprehensive video about Stagger and its nuances, so I don't want to spend a lot of time repeating it since most of the information is still accurate, but I will cover any major changes we've seen and some important notes in this video. Regarding that older video, I'll be sure to provide a link in the description as well as on screen now. If you open up your character page, you can actually see your Stagger percentage. This comes from our main stat, Agility. The second part of this actually comes from a talent that we get pretty early on in our talent tree called Shuffle. This ability allows you to shuffle during combat, increasing the Stagger's effectiveness by 100%. This buff is granted by casting a few core abilities including Keg Smash, Blackout Kick, and Spinning Crane Kick. I can't stress this enough. This is extremely important to understand because if you aren't able to get Shuffle active before you pull a mob or a boss hits you, you'll take most of the damage up front instead, which is not how Brewmaster is designed. Keg Smash is generally your best bet to get Shuffle active since it has a 15-yard range and it grants you Shuffle for 5 seconds. As long as you're able to get Shuffle active early, it's normally not something you need to think about during combat, just the initial opening or start of a pull. While the talent does read increase Stagger by 100%, this isn't totally true. There are diminishing returns on Stagger because with the way that our main stat scales, we would eventually hit 100% Stagger, which means that we would delay all of the damage we take, which we can all admit would be broken. In reality, this tends to hit a soft cap around 78 to 84%. This isn't super important to know for most players, but I did want to mention it here. As I've mentioned already, I've already talked about Stagger in a different video, but I want to cover the main points here. The first thing I want to address is the common misconception that red or deep Stagger is bad. Stagger is a good thing, and will scale with the difficulty of the content you're doing. For most of you who are doing easier content like world quests or normal dungeons or even looking for raid and low mythic plus, oftentimes you're gonna find yourself sitting in green Stagger the majority of the time. As the difficulty of the content ramps up, so will the amount of damage you stagger, in turn increasing your self-healing and damage. While it's great that the Brewmaster can scale naturally into content, the downside is that you'll often feel weaker in lower content if you're over-geared because you're not going to be benefiting from the things we'll talk about in this video. The pros definitely outweigh the cons in this scenario, but I did want to mention it here just in case you're watching a Brewmaster in higher content, dealing more damage and sustaining more healing and wondering how they're doing so. Stagger, as you may know, has 3 states. You have green Stagger, you have yellow Stagger, and you have red Stagger, also known as light, moderate, and heavy. And sometimes I'll refer to heavy as deep Stagger, but that's besides the point. These terms correlate Stagger damage in relation to your maximum health. So, for green Stagger, this is when the damage over time effect is going to deal less than 30% of your total max health. Yellow Stagger is between 30 and 60%, and red Stagger is anything above 60. The general idea is that you'll take damage up front, you'll stagger that damage into a dot, and then you'll reduce the dot damage by casting Purifying Brew. That's the primary way you'll be mitigating damage, but we're going to be covering mitigation in the next video. Right now, I really just want to focus on Stagger because there's a lot of moving parts with it. I mentioned that red Stagger or deep Stagger is a good thing. And the reason I hold that belief is because of a few stable talents in the Brewmaster's spec tree. Let's first discuss one of the most powerful talents, Training of Niuzao. This is a choice node here that competes with light brewing. This talent is a little vague, but will increase your mastery based on your current level of Stagger. The math is pretty easy to break down. For each level of Stagger, you're going to gain 5% mastery on top of what you already have baseline. For example, I have 18% mastery. As soon as I enter combat and hit green Stagger, this number is going to go up to 23%. Once I enter yellow Stagger, this number is presumably going to jump to about 28%, and then once again another 5% once you enter red Stagger. The reason that this is important is because mastery provides a significant bolster to the Brewmaster's ability to deal damage and survive. First, mastery correlates to attack power, which is a coefficient metric that scales many of the Brewmaster's abilities, including damaging abilities like Keg Smash for example, and healing abilities like Celestial Brew. The Brewmaster's mastery is also called Elusive Brawler. After being struck by melee or casting Blackout Kick, you'll gain a stack of a buff called Elusive Brawler, which increases your chance to dodge based on your mastery. So if you have 20% mastery, you have a 20% stacking chance to dodge until presumably you hit 5 stacks, which will then grant you 100% dodge chance until you dodge, which then the stacks are consumed. As your mastery increases, so will the effectiveness of your Elusive Brawler stacks. Another great talent that scales on Stagger is High Tolerance. This is a powerful talent since it increases the effectiveness of your Stagger passively, but it will also grant haste based on your Stagger level, similar to Training of Niuzao. Granted, it provides much less haste compared to the amount of mastery you're going to be getting, but haste can still benefit the Brewmaster in a couple of ways. For example, Keg Smash, Rising Sun Kick, and Purifying Brew all scale with haste. You can often tell which abilities are affected by haste based on their tooltip. If this number right here is green, this means that it's being reduced by haste. So with a little bit more haste, that means we're able to cast Keg Smash more, which means more damage, which also means more cooldown reduction. More Purifying Brews means more mitigation and more healing. The haste we get from this talent is plenty, to the point where most Brewmasters in recent years have opted out of even having haste on any of their gear. Haste, just to note, will also slightly increase your energy regeneration per second, but this requires a ton of haste to be noticeable, so chances are High Tolerance or haste stacking won't change your rotation much. In more recent years, and as recently as the 11.2 patch, Brewmasters have access to a few talents that will further increase the effectiveness of their Stagger. Ox Dance is one of the capstone areas of the tree, and while there are many problems with these set of talents, Ox Dance is a preferred talent option for the highest level of keys. One of my biggest complaints about this game is the vagueness on some tooltips, and Ox Dance is no exception. It doesn't really clarify anything and leaves most players wondering if it's actually impactful. Just to summarize this bizarre talent, this is going to increase the level of your Stagger by roughly 17% for that single hit of damage. This can be extremely strong if a sizable hit is going to happen frequently enough to warrant running this talent. You'll essentially be able to Stagger nearly 100% of that damage and then purify it for additional healing or allow you to have higher Stagger, which you'll gain more damage and survivability. The way that you gain the Ox Dance charges is based off of your current level of Stagger. So when you Purifying Brew in red Stagger, you're going to gain 3 stacks of Ox Dance. If you're in yellow Stagger, it's 2, and if you're in green Stagger, it's 1. It's very similar to how Purified Chi is going to work, which we'll talk about in the next video. It has been common for Brewmaster players to pretty much ignore this capstone until the highest level of play, where they might choose to play Ox Dance. We are hoping for a rework in the next expansion, so fingers crossed. Anyways, one of the newest talents though that was recently introduced is Zen State. This has replaced the Zen Meditation as a cooldown in our class tree, which is a welcome change. Zen State, unlike Training or High Tolerance, will scale based on your current health instead of Stagger level. While numbers on this are a little more or less complicated to explain, the basic premise is that as your health begins to deplete, you'll begin taking less upfront damage and instead more Stagger damage. This further leans into Stagger-based talents, bolstering the Brewmaster and creating this nice feedback loop. Talents like Determination can also provide the monk more agency over the amount of damage they're able to Stagger through cooldowns like Fortifying Brew, but this is something I'm going to discuss when I talk about cooldowns. So with the most recent Brewmaster rework, it's becoming extremely comfortable to live in between the state of 50% and 80% health because Stagger is becoming so effective. The one last talent I do want to talk about is Flow of Chi, because it ties everything kind of together. This talent, unlike Ox Dance, is very easy to understand. Based on your current level of health, you'll gain different effects. This includes a movement speed buff when you're above 90%. If you're between 90 and 35% health, you're going to take 5% less damage, and once you go underneath that 35% health threshold, you'll receive more healing. This fits very naturally into how Brewmasters operate. You will need to learn to live between the 35% and 80% health hold, and the recent rework to Brewmaster has made them feel a lot sturdier in this area. Understanding Stagger, how it impacts the class in a positive way, and learning to be comfortable with the state you are in is one of the hardest parts about learning the Brewmaster Monk, but I hope this episode helped you understand how these mechanics work. This was the second episode of an 8-part series. We've now covered the offensive damage rotation, and now we've covered Stagger as a core component of the Brewmaster's mitigation. In the next video, we're going to be covering how to mitigate damage through things like Celestial Brew, Celestial Infusion, Purifying Brew, and ways to additionally heal yourself. Of course, a massive shout out to all my Patreon supporters who got early access to this video. Their support allows me to make videos like this. Best of luck, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.